Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
This is the final offseason breakdown video for the 2024 offseason. Due to time constraints, we will be breaking down the 5 teams and what they did for their offseason. So before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so we're going to go through pretty much the entire Pacific Division in this one episode. And I think, first we're going to start off with the Sacramento Kings. And the Sacramento Kings, they actually had a pretty eventful offseason. Obviously, they got, a major acquisition and a sign and trade with DeMar DeRozan, right? They signed DeMar DeRozan to a 3-year, basically $75 million deal, right? $23 million the first year, 24.5 the second year, and then 25 in the last year, although not all of it is guaranteed. So they sent Harrison Barnes away to San Antonio, and then they sent, I believe, Chris Duarte and like a second or whatever to Chicago. So they didn't really have to give up a lot to really get him. And, that's pretty nice because DeRozan is a talent upgrade even at the age of 35. He can still give you, some pretty good. He can still give you really good offense. Obviously, last season, right, he was one of the leading fourth quarter scorers in the NBA because of his ability to score off the dribble in the mid range,
Yep.
as well as getting to the free throw lines. We know what he can do. And obviously, he is going to a team that is, already pretty much geared towards offense. Last season, funny enough, though, their offense actually took a step back while their defense got better, right? 14th in offensive rating, but they were 14th in defensive rating. The year before, they were number 1 in offense, but 25th defensively. So, obviously, I think they'd rather be lead on offense, and then maybe okay defensively, right? Like, I mean, you'll take 14th on defense, but I'm not sure if they'll still be 14th. But you'd rather go back up to a top 5 offense, and DeRozan can help you get there because he's a better player than Harrison Barnes. Obviously, as a three-point shooter, right, a little bit different. Although he did take more threes last year, and he can take threes from the corner, right? And he can kind of catch and shoot at different points, right? We've seen him do it, so he can adjust. But he's just a better player than Harrison Barnes, right? Barnes was kind of on the downside, sort of his career at this point. He can still be a serviceable player, but probably not ideally a guy that you want, as your wing next to all those other players, right? Because his defense no longer isn't quite what it used to be, and he doesn't even score as much. But they didn't need him to because you had Fox, you had Sabonis, and you have other guys as well. So they should be pretty primed in a pretty good position to upgrade their offense. It's just defensively, they're probably still not going to really be that great because I mean DeRozan is not really a great defender either. I mean, Barnes has kind of slipped on defense anyways. So you'll take the offensive upgrades. I'm curious to see who starts next to De'Aaron Fox in the backcourt because the last couple of seasons it had been Kevin Huerter, right? But during the latter part of last season, Huerter wasn't available because he had the shoulder injury, so he just wasn't playing. And Keon Ellis stepped in and kind of took his place as the starting off guard, right? And he actually brings a different element because of his defense, right? He did shoot 42% from 3 last season, but it was on 3 attempts a game, so not a lot. He doesn't really shoot a lot anyways, but he can get you some rebounds. He can block some shots. He's got some really good length as a guard. So, I'm curious to see whether or not they still stick with that, or does Herter get another opportunity? I'm not sure what his health is at this point. I think he is cleared, but I don't know if they're automatically just going to put him back in there. But it'd be interesting to see if they do, because then you could shake it up with defense in that second unit. And then they did draft Devin Carter, but he won't play for I think most of the season because he had a shoulder injury, I think in the summer league.
Mm-hmm.
So he's probably not really going to be much of a factor this season. And it seemed like a solid pick because he's a defensive-minded guard. He's athletic. He can rebound. We just have to obviously see if the shot also translates. But we won't see it anyways for a little bit. But he is 22, so he's not like a 19-year-old rookie. So I don't mind the pick at all. It would have been nice to see if they could have picked up another wing, but sometimes you just have to kind of pick the best available there at that point, which got no issues with that. Other than that, right? Fox, Sabonis, and then you have Murray, Keegan Murray, and then DeMar DeRozan. That's your four that are locked in. Then you're going to have Malik Monk as your sixth man, presumably. You still have Trey Lyles, still have Alex Len. So most of the guys they ran it back. It's just obviously Barnes is out, DeRozan is in, and then obviously Devin Carter's in. JaVale McGee, I believe, is gone. So in terms of what they did this offseason, I mean, I think you got to give them I think B plus I'd say is pretty sufficient in terms of what they did because I didn't expect them initially to get a talent upgrade like DeRozan, but they got him, and they got him for a relatively good contract. And then the Devin Carter pick, I think, is a solid pick, even though he probably won't play much this season. So not really anything else that I have in terms of complaints. It just would be nice, if they could have added a little bit more defense. But it's such a talent upgrade that you can probably live with it, at least for now, because they should be a lot tougher to score, or they should be a lot tougher to guard now because of the added extra offensive pressure that DeRozan brings as a scorer, in addition to already having Fox and Sabonis. And, again, they all like to have the ball in their hands, so I'm curious to see how that fits. But I think they'll be able to make it work. And they still have some other three-point shooters on the roster, so I'm not really worried at all about the offensive fit. It's just I know they're probably not going to realistically be able to guard that many people, aside from, maybe certain lineups. But that's their identity. They're an offensive first team, and I think they accomplished leaning into that goal. So pretty good offseason, I believe.
Yeah, I give him an A actually. I would kind of
Okay.
go a step further just because, like you mentioned, all the talent upgrades. I think, starting with Devin Carter, I think off rip you can kind of tell that he fits, this team's identity probably a little bit better than Davion Mitchell. They
Mhm.
both are smaller guards, but I think Devin Carter's athleticism can definitely help translate into him being a better perimeter defender when he does make his debut eventually. And then obviously DeRozan is a direct talent upgrade over freaking Harrison Barnes. So I think
Yeah.
you really cannot hate on anything that they did. Um,
Oh,
Me personally, I don't think they're gonna reap the benefits of this offseason probably until the next one. And it kind of goes back to what you were talking about with the you know, the trio. Like it's a three-headed snake, but they all do the same thing pretty much. Like they're all very reliant on inside the perimeter scoring, mid range, paint buckets, all that stuff. But the cool thing is, I guess, they all are underrated passers in their positions, I guess.
mhm.
People wouldn't say they're top five, but,
Right.
they're not bad passers. So I think there is room for them to kind
Sabonis
of,
is pretty good. And Fox or Sabonis and DeRozan especially I think are pretty good. And, well, I mean Fox is as well,
yeah,
but
yeah, they're all solid playmakers. So no concerns in terms of sharing the ball, but maybe execution. I'm curious who's going to be the go-to guy in certain situations. That would kind of be my only gripe um
okay.
with stuff like that. But yeah, I mean overall, like you said, overall I think a great offseason. Also Malik Monk, re-signing him was kind
Yeah.
of intriguing, I guess, considering they didn't have a lot of flexibility and they
Mhm.
still pulled it off. So shout out to them for that as well.
Yeah, and I forgot that was actually done after they lost in the play-in, like that was because you were able to re-sign and or renegotiate with your free agents
Yeah.
before free agency actually began. So they gave him a new contract.
Yeah.
And like you said, it was, not quite as much as I think some people were expecting, because I think some people thought he might, get more from somebody else,
That's what I thought.
from another team, but he ended up staying. But again, I just don't really know how much more they would have actually given him in the first, like another team would have given him in the first place.
Right.
But I mean, either way, he's going to be 17 million this year, 18 million the next year, and then 20 million in year three, and then 2027, 2028, he's got a player option for
Yes, sir.
21.5 million.
Yep.
So I mean, works for me.
Yeah, W.
Because again, he's certainly above average microwave scorer, six man type guy off the bench, right? He's very good at that. Because again, he can, in addition to being able to create his own offense, he can also play within the offense too. And I think those type of six men are really valuable. That's why even like Jordan Poole, right? Like when he was in Golden State and they won the title, that was part of what made him good because he could play and create his own shot, but he could also spot up, and they could run real plays for him as opposed to always being like, yeah, we're just gonna run, every possession in the fourth quarter through Jordan Poole. Like you don't have to do that. You don't
Right.
have to do it with Monk. You can do both. So I think that really helps them. In terms of the offensive structure, like I said, I'm not really worried about their offense.
Sure, yeah. I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Now, I guess the question is on the other end of the floor, right? What do we really expect, from this group, right? Because obviously you have Fox, and then whoever they start at the two, and then DeRozan, Murray, and Sabonis. And with Keegan Murray, I guess maybe there's more defensively expected out of him. But then he's also surrounded by, like DeRozan and Sabonis is not really a rim protector. But I mean, you do have length and athleticism, I guess, kind of. But what do we think of them on that end in terms of is it going to be awful? Do we expect them to be worse defensively than last season? And if so, what can they really do to mitigate that? Because there's probably, I mean, to be fair, they were the 3 seed a couple seasons ago with one of the league's worst defenses, but that was because they were the number one offense. So I guess that's the big question: is do we expect that to balance? Do we expect that type of shift where they go from 14th defensively last season to 25 or 30, 25 or 22, whereas maybe they go up from 13th on offense to second, third, something like that? Do you see this as a top 5 offensive team
It
and
could
then
be.
defensively bottom 5 or,
It could
top
be. I,
10?
I think it's
Okay.
going to be probably top 7 offense,
Hmm.
bottom 5 defense, if I'm keeping it real.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and I think they were really banking on Devin Carter to be a part of this rotation. And I think
Mhm.
that's going to hurt them because they got rid of Davion Mitchell, who was one of their better defenders. So I am
Mhm.
curious, how that's going to work out. But I don't know. Offensively, though, I think like I said, I don't have any concerns about necessarily the fit. It's just more so the execution when all 3 of those guys are going to be on the floor, maybe in a clutch time moment or something like that.
Yeah, and that's going to be the nice part is that late in games you're going to have multiple guys that you could go to offensively, and each guy, like you said, even though they all like to play with the ball in their hands, they all do have certain assets to them offensively that the other doesn't. Like Fox has his speed and his ability to get to his own spots, and he's got the pull ups, he's got the floater, right? DeRozan, right, can kind of just shoot over the top, with his skill on offense. And then, Sabonis can, he can post up, he can play in the high post, he can kind of get downhill at times. So they all have different things that they can go to. And, that could probably help Sacramento as well, because then it's okay, well, now your number 2 option isn't Sabonis or Fox or even Monk. Right now, those guys can kind of move down to third, fourth options. And then DeRozan can slide in probably, as 1 or 2 depending on the night or whatever. Now the roles are probably offensively slotted a little bit better, and that's probably going to help too. Because then because there were some games in the playoffs, we know Sabonis seems like his production drops off somewhat in the postseason. So, now you have another guy that can take some of that pressure off of him, and that probably will help him in some ways. It won't help him on defense, but offensively, which is where his bread and butter is, that's where it should help.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. I haven't liked what I've seen from the team as a whole through the preseason. I've liked what I've
Hmm.
seen from the 3 guys though, for sure. That's where I'm like, I don't know how this is really going to turn out. I think they're kind of going to be reliant on probably blowing teams out, or at least,
Yeah.
being more potent on offense than these other teams cuz they really can't get a stop in my opinion.
Yeah. And then after that, where do we think they fit in the West? Because the Vegas odds over unders have them basically at 46.5. So they have them ahead of a handful of some of these other teams. So it seems like that Vegas is kind of in on the idea of them making the playoffs, right? Because I mean, you look at some of these other teams in the Western Conference. I mean, they're essentially, right in right in that 4 to 8 spot, basically, like the middle part of the Western Conference
Mhm.
playoff picture, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I'm going under on that. Like I said, I don't think they're going to reap the benefits of this offseason this year.
Hmm.
I think it's going to be the following year where we get to see, a full year under their belt.
Hmm.
Everything's kind of concretely set in. Everybody's used to each other because I'm telling you, I just don't have a whole lot of confidence in a move like this working immediately.
Okay. Yeah, this one is kind of, I think, a little bit tough to, because I feel like it could be like a bounce back year for them where it feels like, last year was kind of a rough year where it was like, step up defensively, but offensively not great. They had more injuries towards the end, so it didn't pan out quite as well. And now that, like, I guess you added a DeRozan, that gives you a little bit of a buffer in case somebody's out. So, that's where they probably could win more games. I guess it's just weird because a couple seasons ago, what did they win? They won like 48 games, right? And that got them into the third seed, and then I think last year they won, what was it, like 46?
Yeah,
So
46 and
only
36.
yeah, so I mean, I guess it's just like I feel like they did get better, but did they get better enough to win basically like 50 games or close to it? Like, I mean, maybe, but that one is really tough because I feel like because I don't know, like it's kind of hard for me to imagine them being worse than last year, but the West also got better. So, they could be 6, 7, 8 in the West, but that might only be like 45 wins. So I may go under, but like very, very slight under to where it's like a game difference,
Okay.
right? But I could see them like I could see them offensively just blowing some teams out and winning enough games to where they might be able to go over. But I don't know. I just feel like some of these other West teams might be better. But to be fair, I mean I think they shocked everybody 2 seasons ago with how good they were. So I mean they could do it, but I just don't think they're quite as good as some of the other teams towards the top of the West. But like I don't think they are good enough to get to 48. But I could be wrong.
No, I kind of agree. And my kind of thought process is look at the projections of like who's going to really be in that top 5, top 4. A lot of two-way identity teams, a lot of teams that feed off of, both ends of the floor, whereas the Kings,
Mm.
I think they're going to be very lopsided and offensively heavy. Nothing wrong with that, but I just don't think that that's enough to, you know,
Yeah.
get over that little
If
hump.
if they're a top 3 offense, then they could get the over. But if they're
Yeah.
like 5, 6, 7,
Yeah.
then they'll probably go under
Yep.
because then the defense won't be enough. But I mean, they should be a top 5 offense, but we'll see. But again, like you still have Fox and Sabonis. Those two guys are really good. Fox shot, pretty well from 3 for most of last season, and I think it kind of regressed a little bit, but still, if he can continue to develop that, that ought to help. But then Keegan Murray, if he continues to progress, I mean, that'll be fine. But again, I think the Kings they had a really good. I think they'll still be in the mix of playoff teams. Like they should be better. I just don't know like where is that going to get them standings wise.
Yeah.
So now we're moving on to the next team, and we're gonna do the Golden State Warriors. So this is a different team, right? Obviously, last season we know what happened. They started the year off pretty well, actually, where they were like towards the top of the Western Conference through like the first 10 or 12 games. And then Steph missed like a game or so due to injuries. And then they just kind of fell apart, right? Then the Draymond stuff happened, and then they dropped down and down and down. They did over the last latter half of the season. They actually ended up having a pretty good record, but because they had already fallen down by so much, they could only get to the 9-10 spot. So they did finish with basically 46 wins. And then, of course, they were in the play-in against the Sacramento Kings as the 10 seed, and then they lost. So their season ended, pretty early for them. Although they've missed the playoffs, I want to say, like 3 out of the last 5, 6 seasons. I mean, obviously, one of those years ended in a title, where they made the playoffs. So, I guess that's a trade-off. But either way, this team underwent a decent amount of change, right? Because when you look at the roster, obviously Clay's gone. He left and went to Dallas. And then Chris Paul, they waived him. He went to the Spurs, right? Dario Saric is gone. He went to the Nuggets. But they made, a number of moves. So obviously they through the Klay Thompson sign and trade, right? That involved like 6 teams, right? They picked up DeAnthony Melton wasn't a sign and trade. That was through with the mid-level exception, right? They signed him to a 1-year, $12.8 million deal, right? As basically 3-and-D defensive guard. Had a good year for Philly, but missed a lot of time due to a back issue. So if he can be healthy, that's a pretty good pickup. And then through the sign and trade, they acquired Kyle Anderson from Minnesota, right, on a 3-year deal. They acquired Buddy Hield on a 4-year deal, with the 4th year being a player option. And then after that, that's about it, right? Because after that, in the draft, they drafted Quentin Post, and he's a two-way guy, so he's not on the regular part of the roster. But after that, all the other guys pretty much, have returned from last year's roster. So in terms of what went wrong for them, again, like, you can look at this team in a couple of ways, right? A lot went wrong for them last year. Draymond lost his mind and didn't play in a lot of games. In the games he played, they were really good. In the games he didn't play, they were not very good. So, he played, I mean, if we look at the numbers, I mean, he played in 55 games, right? So he missed about, 27 games or so. So, how many more games would they have won if he had played? It could have been more, probably. But you did get, 70 plus games out of Steph. With him, it seemed like he kind of ran out of gas towards the end of the regular season, and that, I feel like, probably kind of, obviously I'm not putting the blame on him because it was the limitations of the roster, but that helped to facilitate some of the problems that they had down the stretch. Also at different points, defense was kind of up and down, although defensively, they had their moments, but they were 15th on defense and 8th on offense. So they were most of their bread and butter was offense last year. So they ended up adding some good defensive players, right? Anderson, and Melton, those are good defensive players. You still have guys like Peyton. Obviously, you still have Wiggins, right, who had a career worst year last year. I think I had read that his father had passed away with the illness. So, obviously, thoughts and prayers to Wiggins out for that. But in terms of this roster, it's kind of, I'm not really sure what to make of it from the perspective of they could be good, but at the same time, how good can they realistically be? I mean, on media day, Steph, had basically the quote of, we have a chance to be relevant, with the possibility of, like, making some noise later on. So I guess kind of essentially, like, if we can maybe win enough games and hang on like the Lakers a couple years ago, or even the Mavs last year, and then make a trade at the deadline, whatever that is. We don't know. Because obviously they did search through the trade market in the offseason. They tried to look at Paul George. They tried to look at marketing. But, they weren't able to get any of those guys. So, I mean, when you look at the roster, I mean, they do have a lot of depth. I'll give them that. Like, I mean, you could make the case that they have like 12 guys that could play any given night. Some of those guys I don't personally really want, like, in a playoff situation.
Nope.
But in the regular season, they should be pretty feisty defensively. I mean, in the preseason, I guess they're undefeated. I don't really care about preseason, but at the same time, I like the defense. So I think they will be a much better defensive team. I guess my main question is offensively, what am I going to get out of the non-Steph guys? Presumably Kuminga takes a jump. Whatever that is, I don't know. But, if he continues to improve, that ought to help. I just don't really know how many if I expect them to win significantly more games than last season. Because, I mean, I know people mention, like, well, if Draymond didn't miss as much time, well, it's like, well, why was he out, right? It wasn't because of injury. I mean, it was because of stuff he normally does. Now, you could say that's the extreme version of it, right? Like, he doesn't normally miss 20 games due to suspensions, right? But, again, we know at different points he'll have a random game or two kind of throwing it away because he loses it. But then the other question is Wiggins, obviously, because, again, he was not very good last year. And if he does maybe be not horrible, right, that could probably help because they don't really have any other forwards on the roster that do what Wiggins does, in theory, when he's good, where he can shoot and also defend and crash the boards and give them length. Because, like, Kuminga can score, but, his jump shot is kind of up and down. Even defensively, he's not as good as Wiggins, although he's improved. So that's kind of the guy where if you could get something good out of him, that would help. I just don't know what to expect. I mean, he had an illness, so he was out for most of the preseason, so he played in one game so far. But personally, I'm not expecting a ton from this team in terms of like I don't think they're a contender, and I don't really see a deal out there like an obvious trade that would make them a contender. I mean, to be fair, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt where maybe I might need to see a little bit more of this team during the regular season, but I feel like last year most people expected the team to be good and they just weren't. I mean, I can see the case for them being better this season because of the defense, but I don't know. Like, what is their starting five? Is it Steph, Wiggins, Kaminga, Draymond, Trace Jackson Davis? Do they start Draymond at the five and then Wiggins comes off the bench? Does Pod start? I don't know. So, I like some of the players on this team, but some of them I would also like kind of prefer to not have to be as reliant on them. So I think in terms of like you lost Clay and Chris Paul, like you did a decent job in terms of, kind of like plugging up certain holes on the defensive end. Because I like Melton and I like Kyle Anderson and even Buddy Hield is like just a random, he can go off for X amount of threes on any given night. Like those are solid pickups. So I'll give them a B plus for what they did in the offseason, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to amount to really them doing a whole lot unless, like I said, there's some type of random unexpected trade. I just don't really see it with this group just because of the fact that, I mean, what can I realistically expect? And then obviously for Steph, that's the other issue where he already played 70 something games last year and he just is coming off of an Olympics run. If he misses more than like 15 games, then I would say they have pretty much no shot. Like you're kind of banking and hoping on that Steph is still going to be Steph on most nights because there's not too many other guys on this roster that I can just pencil in to have a good game. You could say that there's a lot of guys that could give you production, but then there are nights where I could see none of them giving them production. And like I said, if he gets hurt, it's a wrap.
Yeah, I'm much lower. I'm going D plus on this one. I don't really like a lot of this stuff, and when it first happened and all they acquired all these guys and lost Clay, I immediately was like, I don't like this. I feel like they're cooked. I feel like losing Clay and letting him essentially walk, just isn't a good look for me, in my opinion. Chris Paul, what a failed experiment that was. Saric, I mean, he's gone. The only addition that I probably do like is Kyle Anderson because he probably does bring a little bit more to the table than a guy like Dario Saric. I feel like Kyle Anderson is a little bit more versatile on the defensive end and things of that nature. But
Yeah,
the
good passer
glaring
too.
exactly the glaring issue here, they don't have a soul to take pressure off of Steph Curry.
Mhm.
There is no second option. You missed out on Laurie. You missed out on PG. Granted, I don't think either of those moves would have helped them get back into extreme contention or anything like that. I just think that the ebb and flow of basketball here is their time is over. And I think people have to come to that realization. Um, I just don't foresee them being able to make any move that makes me believe in the team. I will always have belief in Steph Curry. Don't get me wrong. As
Right.
long as Steph is on the team, you have a shot. But when it's a team that's built like this, that shot is very, very small. And, it's kind of like what you laid out
Yeah.
with Draymond. There's a lot of uncertainty here. And I think this is the first time in a long time that we've kind of questioned the Warriors' kind of validity in terms of contention. Um,
Mhm.
and we kind of saw it start to happen last year with the whole Chris Paul thing. Some people were believers, some people were not. Shout out to the people who were not. Yeah,
I
shout out
was
to the
not.
people who were not. Yeah, what a move. But regardless, I think that's going to end up hurting them in the long run. They weren't able to kind of like pass the baton. And when that kind of happens, I just think things are just going to fall apart. Like, I don't think Kaminga's the guy to be that second option that they're
Right.
probably realistically hoping for. Pajemski, I think he's a solid role player, like,
Mm.
and definitely like a guy who could ascend to an even greater level, but I don't think that's a second option either. And none of the guys that they added are second options either. Granted, like you
Mm.
said, the only positive that I have is Kyle Anderson and depth. That's kind of all that I really have for them. Honestly, that's why
Mhm.
it's a D plus for me.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's the tough part because, again, like you already kind of hinted at, you just don't really have a guy that I think you feel comfortable, as the second option to stuff. Because like Kaminga's improved and he could have a monster season, but I just also just personally think that him being your second option doesn't make you a contender.
Right.
It doesn't probably even really make you a great team. I mean,
No.
again, they won 46 games, which is not bad at all. It's just not really good enough to make inroads in the Western Conference, where it seems like if you don't win 50 games, your chances of being in the play-in are very high.
Yep.
So, I mean, and that's the problem is I don't think this roster is good enough to win 50 games. So, I mean, unless again there's some type of trade that happens that I just again maybe the hope is that by the deadline someone else comes up for them to maybe find, but who is it? Like that's the issue. And sometimes like we don't know ahead of time, but I just I don't have a lot of belief like you said in the roster. Like I said, I still believe in Steph, but I'm just not super sold that this roster is going to be good enough to really do much. And it doesn't even seem like anybody on the team is really like making the case that like we're going to try to, we're going to prove people wrong, whatever. And then like, this is a title team. Like nobody's saying that. I mean,
Right.
so it's
The
like,
writing's on the wall.
yeah. So it's like, if they don't believe in the opportunity of winning a title, why should I? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I mean, that's kind of part of it. I mean, last year, actually, they were going into the season talking about a title. And then it became very apparent, about 20 or so games in, we might not be good enough. And then once you got like to the halfway point, it's like, yeah, we're not good enough.
Yep.
So, and like you said, sometimes it kind of comes faster than you expect. Because only 2 years ago, they won the title. It wasn't that long ago. But it seems like since that point, it's just kind of gone on a downward trend. The young guys didn't necessarily pan out the way that they were hoping for. And then they've also lost other guys as well that, kind of helped them out. I mean, we didn't even mention like a Moses Moody, who, again, like a good player, but where are the minutes going to come in? Like, I mean, and that's kind of the weird part of this roster is because there's a lot of solid players, but it feels like there's too many guys where it just there needs to be some level of consolidation on the roster for better talent.
Mhm.
And until that happens, I can't take this team seriously as a contender. The over-under is 43.5. So what do we think of that?
43.5?
Yeah, that's the over-under.
Under. I'm sorry.
You're going to go under?
Yeah.
Wow.
And the only reason I think Steph misses time, I think Draymond misses time. There is nobody on that team to carry the load. I don't, maybe that might be jumping the gun a little bit, but it might be a hot take, whatever you want to call it. But I'm going to go under on them. I'm just not high on them at all, honestly. That might be the worst grade that I've given out so far in the West.
I'd say I would go. Yeah, I'd say I would go under too. I mean, if this was like Steph of like a couple years ago, I'd say like pretty much over.
Yeah.
But again, like, and it's not even like he's bad at all.
No, it's
I just
not
feel
on
like
him.
he may not. No, I just feel like he's not quite at his peak at this point, and so I feel like because of that, again, the margin for error is just so low. Where it's like, again, like he could play and have a good game, and it just may not matter, right? Like, there are certain guys like at this point where give them whatever roster you have, and they can probably make the playoffs, but at this point, he probably can't do it with this roster.
No.
Just because of the fact that, again, you need an additional guy. And, like, I mean, even like a Jordan Poole or like a Clay at different points, but Clay wasn't able to do that either, right? Because his game had kind of, leveled off to the point where he was no longer like a reliable second option, right? That's why, like, in Dallas, he might be better for them just because of the fact that you're not asking him, to be a second guy. You're asking him to be, another guy in the offense, right? Like he'll still get his shots, he'll still get his opportunities, but you don't need him as much offensively in Dallas as what Golden State needed because they didn't have anybody else you could rely on. Again, what is the starting five? And maybe like that doesn't matter as much, and like the closing five is more so what's important, which is true. But like, who are their five best players?
I mean, it's what Steph at the 1, at the
2.
2. The 2 is the one that's really throwing me off.
I guess Draymond.
I mean, yeah, Draymond's going to be in the starting lineup, but I'm saying like the 2 guard position. Like, who's going to play that?
Yeah, I don't know, because at different points it almost kind of felt like that they were leaning towards Podziemski, but
is he
you
a
could
2
also
though?
go.
I feel like he's a 3. I don't know. That might be stupid.
Yeah, I mean, like
some people think Kuminga's like a 4. I don't know. I
And
guess
Draymond said he's a 3, I think.
Draymond said Draymond is a 3.
No, I think Draymond said Kuminga's a 3.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess if we're going by that logic, then you have to start Pods. I think at the 2, Kuminga at the 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is where it gets nasty, huh?
Yeah, exactly, and that's the point. I'm not sure, and that's like, is Wiggins gonna come off the bench?
I forgot about him. I didn't even mention him,
and that's what I was saying. Where I was saying, like, if he can have like a bounce back year, that would help a lot because the things that he does best, they don't really have any other wings on the roster.
He could be their number 2, but he needs to play like that title year.
Right,
is he still there?
Is that? Yeah, I don't know, and it's like, I give him. I cut him some slack just because of the personal 100%, stuff.
100%.
But I also just don't really know what to expect. Like, and
right.
Because I don't know. I mean, because last year was by far his worst year as a pro.
100%, which is, I think he caught everybody off guard, and not to put all the blame on him, but it was a big reason as to why they stunk it up, like really big.
Right, because again, when he's like one of their 3 best guys, then he makes them a lot better because, like I said, the things that he does fit in naturally alongside everyone else. Because again, tall, long, athletic wing that can shoot threes and defend and rebound.
Yeah,
fits in perfectly with what they want to do.
The reason why he was a number 1 pick.
Yeah, so I don't know.
And you know what? I would say start him and then start Kuminga at the 4 and then put Dre at the 5, bro. That's what I would say.
Okay, yeah, because they've done different lineups in the preseason where they've experimented with like Trace Jackson Davis as the starting 5. I've seen them start Looney at the 5.
Right.
So I feel like they're probably going to start a traditional center. I don't really see them like having Draymond play the 5 the whole time. But again, and they may change it depending on the matchup. I don't know, but like I said, like the fact that we don't know, just I don't really see it with this team. But I know some people are higher on this team because of the defensive guys, and I can understand that for sure because I do like those pickups, but they need some help, like in terms of like hoping that a guy pops up as the second option because I just don't think that it's going to be able to get. I don't think they're going to be able to get it done with Steph, and then the hot hand is the second guy. Like I don't think they have enough.
It's not serious. So, it's not a serious team.
Yeah. So moving on. After that. Let's go to the Los Angeles Clippers, right? So, the Clippers were a team that going into last season, right? We weren't necessarily sure about. I think with the Clippers, some people had some belief in their ability to do something, in terms of a bounce back year, and then other people were like, it feels like their time in the sun might be done. Then they got Harden. Then initially they stunk it up. And then they ended up being one of the best teams in the NBA for, 3 months or something like that. By the time the All-Star break rolled around, I think at one point they were the 1 seed. Then after the All-Star break, they fell off, and then eventually Kawhi got hurt, and then that was it, right? I mean, he played a couple of those playoff games against the Mavs, but he wasn't himself. And then supposedly still it may not be available on opening night. Actually, Shams earlier today said that for now he's sidelined indefinitely. So I mean that basically already lets us know right there, like, okay, like, do I need to say more? I mean, we will of course say more, but obviously they lost Paul George, right? That's kind of the big thing. He went to Philly. They didn't give him the extra year, which I mean, I guess maybe at this point, maybe I understand given how the team is. They did re-sign James Harden. I guess they kind of had to. Like, you couldn't lose both of them, but I mean, if you were gonna lose one, I mean, you couldn't realistically actually just let both of them go. But I mean, I don't know. But I mean, we'll see what he does this year. 35 years old, 2-year deal, second year being a player option, so very short term deal. They did re-sign Zubac to an extension. Right, so he's in the last year of that previous deal, and then after that, he'll basically be around a $20 million a year guy. And then they also re-signed Terrence Mann, basically to $15 million a year deal, right? 3-year, $45-ish million extension, so that's nice. They signed Derrick Jones Jr. to a 3-year deal, to replace Paul George. They signed Chris Dunn to a 3-year deal in a sign and trade, I guess, as the Westbrook replacement. They also signed and brought back Nicholas Batum, who they traded away for James Harden. And then they also drafted Kobe Brown, right? Or not Kobe Brown.
That was the year before, right? Cam Christie.
Yeah, my bad. Jordan Miller. Jordan
Okay.
Miller, I think.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Cam Christie
and
too.
Cam Christie.
Yep.
Cam Christie too.
Yeah.
But Cam Christie, I think, is on a regular contract. Miller's on a 2-way.
Yeah.
And then they also signed Mo Bamba and Kevin Porter Jr. for giggles. So
Yeah,
that
sums it up.
yeah, they did have an active offseason, so they did acquire a number of guys, but they lost Paul George. So that off the bat is very difficult for me to give them that grade for their offseason because I just think, like, even though none of those guys that they signed are bad, they're not Paul George. And I would still probably just prefer to have Paul George than most of those other guys. So, I mean, C, I guess, for their offseason. I mean, like, C minus, D plus. I mean, I don't really. I mean, like I said, like I get like the other moves that they made, like, but I'm gonna kind of settle in like at like a C because it's like I don't dislike any of the players they acquired, but I also think losing Paul George is a big no-no. I'm actually kind of trolling. Like, I actually am giving them a D because I don't really like what they did in the offseason at all. I don't mind the players that they signed, but you lost Paul George. So that alone is already a D for me. I don't care what else they do. So I was just kind of joking with that first pick, but it's a D. And they're probably not going to be very good this season, especially if Kawhi's going to miss time, which already seems like it's going to happen. So, I mean, we mentioned the Warriors are cooked. I think this team is in an even worse spot because at least the Warriors can claim that they have, can say we got titles, but the Clippers don't have any. And then also you have the factor of the picks, right? Because they have some of those picks years coming up where those picks are going to go to OKC, and they already gave them, if I'm not mistaken, Jalen Williams, and I think was it somebody else too? I think no, I guess they got SGA in the trade for Paul George.
Yeah.
And then they all that's already right. And then to add on top of that, Jalen Williams as well. So yeah, not really great for them. Like I said, I don't dislike a lot of any of the players that they acquired. But again, like I said, if you lose Paul George, that these guys are not going to make up for that. Like, yeah, maybe they could be feisty in some aspects, but yeah, it's like no. I don't see it.
100%.
I know I got that one.
Yeah, you did. I was like making all kinds of crazy faces, but I'm going with an F.
Okay.
This is freaking disgusting. If I could really give an F for the decade, I would, but that's not the case here. But yeah, like you mentioned, Paul George being gone is already like knocks you down to a C automatically. And then bringing in all these guys, granted, I like these players individually, but as a collective, this group is not going anywhere. Like, they do have some solid things. Like, have been some things that I've liked during the preseason. Like, at least we know Kevin Porter Jr. could still play basketball.
Yep.
But then today, Kawhi Leonard out indefinitely. Like, the stuff never stops. And I know Kawhi being out indefinitely isn't technically a part of their offseason, but you didn't do anything to address that, that aspect. Like, we all knew Kawhi was going to go down, and you had no contingency plan. So what are we doing here? It makes no sense. And like I said, the group as a whole collectively is not doing crap. So it doesn't matter. We already saw what this team looked like with the duo of Kawhi and Harden when Paul George was out. It was nasty. Right. So now it's just going to be James Harden and a bunch of like ragtag NBA players. And I'm not trying to say that to disrespect them, but as a collective group, I don't like it. Like I said, individually, I think all these players bring some positivity, like a lot of defense. You have some spark plugs, Kevin Porter Jr. But if you're trying to contend, this isn't the way you do it. And I'm just keeping it real, It's so funny. Like, I remember kind of like researching this team, and everybody was kind of like, well, what happens if Kawhi gets hurt? And then lo and behold, today here we are. He's not playing. So
Right.
yeah, I think it's an automatic F because you didn't do anything to address pretty much anything that happened to you in the past 10 years.
Right. What was your favorite signing, I guess, of theirs then? Like in terms of the guy that you like, the signing you like the most out of these.
Probably Derek Jones Jr. Um
Right.
just because of how phenomenal he played, throughout the
Yeah.
playoffs last year and
I
how pivotal he
Mhm.
was to that team. And it's like, in theory, if you do build a contending team around, Kawhi Leonard and James Harden, can't believe I just said that with a straight face, but
Mhm.
Derek Jones Jr. would be an ideal piece because of what he
Mhm.
brings defensively and what he can potentially do, on offense as well. So that's definitely the guy that I would say is a good signing because, I mean, value wise, I think he's pretty solid as well. Um, and I guess the other one would probably be Kevin Porter Jr. He's back and he can still play ball at a pretty
Mhm.
decent level. So that's
Mhm.
pretty solid as well.
Yeah, and then I guess Chris Dunn is like a athletic defensive guard.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, and again, like that's kind of what we mentioned. Like a lot of these guys individually are fine. Cam Christie is a draft pick, right? Like that's fine.
Yeah.
But like you said, together collectively as a unit, like I don't see this team going anywhere. PJ Tucker is unhappy. I don't really blame him honestly
Yeah.
because I wouldn't really want to be stuck there either.
What a dumpster
Um,
fire, man.
yeah, but yeah, and again, we already said before we even ever really talked about this team's offseason in depth, like if Kawhi has to miss time, that's it. And like as you already said, and as we found out today, he's out indefinitely.
Yeah.
They're over under 36 and a half. I
Now,
mean, with
if
him
he's
being out indefinitely, like I mean, yeah, that could be possible.
yeah, I could see them going even lower than that. How low can
Right.
you go? Like literally, because this is I mean, I know
Yeah.
it's like it's one of those things where we knew it was gonna happen. I just didn't know it was
Yeah.
gonna happen today.
Right. Yeah,
Like
that's the tough part.
that's the
It's
thing
like,
that's throwing me
yeah,
off.
that's the right, exactly, because there was just no way that I was expecting him to be able to. And again, that's not a slight on him. It's just we know based off of the last several seasons that he probably at this point just can't realistically play
No.
that many games over an 82 game season, and that's not going to get better when he's already what now he's 33, if I'm not mistaken. So that's not going to change. Um, he played 68 games last season, right, and that's the most games he's played um, since what? He was a Spur? Yeah, since he was a San Antonio Spur, which was a long time ago. I mean, that was 6, 7 years ago. So I
Yeah.
mean, um, I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of tough. I mean, because obviously, like when he's healthy, he's still awesome. I mean, he was an All Star. He was on NBA All NBA second team. So he had a really good year last year when he was healthy. But then right at the end, then he got hurt, and then that was it. And then he wasn't in the Olympics, obviously, because he had the meniscus thing, and then
It
that was
never
it.
ends,
So
bro. It never ends.
yeah, exactly. And that's the tough part. And then with Harden, again, even if Kawhi was healthy, I mean, I still don't see like a high ceiling for the roster, but if he played like 60 something, if he played a similar amount of games this season, I mean, like, yeah, they could be like a play-in team, but with Kawhi being out for the foreseeable future, because they said indefinitely,
Right.
so we don't even know when he'll be available to return. I mean, yeah, I mean, they could easily fall below 40 wins for sure.
Yeah.
But I guess, are you gonna actually pick the under, or are you gonna go over?
Under.
Okay,
Um
I'm gonna say yeah.
it's
I'd say
just the
under
group.
too, especially with this news
Yeah.
completely cement. I would say under because indefinitely. I mean, yeah, it could mean 2 weeks, but it could also mean 2 months. And I mean, and I'm not saying he's going to be out for 2 months. It's just if he's already ruled as indefinitely, that doesn't give me great confidence
No.
that he's going to be available in like a couple of weeks. Like I mean, which again, like you knew it was going to happen at some point. It's just like you said before we got on to record, like hours before we got on to
Right.
record, they said that. Yeah,
And
I
before
didn't
the
expect
season
that.
started, I thought we were going to be having this type of conversation, 3 months down the line, not
Right.
before the week before tip off.
Yeah, and exactly. And just I guess to kind of go over some of the players. Yeah, Kevin Porter Jr. You can score. Batum, older guy at this point, but I guess still like a smart 3-and-D wing forward. I guess now he's a little more like a 4. Dunn, we already mentioned he was in Utah, right? As a quick change of pace, athletic defensive guard, even shot threes okay, but still not like the biggest part of his game. And then Derek Jones Jr. on Dallas as a starter, athletic forward. So, that's a hustle guy that can get you some rebounds and help. Then Mo Bamba, okay. I mean, at the certain, it just seems like he just hasn't really panned out.
Yeah.
Of course, the 1 year where the Clippers aren't good, maybe he might actually have a good year. Who knows?
Man.
Um, but yeah, like there's not really much of a need to focus on a lot of the players on this team,
No.
especially at this point, already knowing that Kawhi, is not going to be available for a while. But like I said, I like some of the signings individually, and I like the extensions they gave out. But yeah, not much positivity other than I guess the new arena, the Intuit Dome.
Yeah.
That's nice, but if I'm a fan, like it's a new stadium, which is awesome, but you don't really have much of a team to root for at this point. But I guess, now that they're going in with no expectations, maybe I guess the experience may not be as like annoying or stressful, but I feel like it might be frustrating because another year of seeing one of your best players, on the sideline. So
And
I don't know.
you look down the line for them, there's not much there. We're keeping it real.
Yeah. So now next up, I guess on a more optimistic note, the Phoenix Suns, right? So the Phoenix Suns, yeah, they acquired Bradley Beal a year ago, and then they added some minimum contract guys. Looked like they were going to be really, really good. We knew defensively they would struggle, but offensively they were going to be good. And then during the regular season, right, they were a good offensive team. Although they weren't quite as elite on the offensive end as you would have liked. They were ninth in offensive rating. They were better defensively than expected, 13th. Ninth in net rating, 149 games under Frank Vogel. Then they went into the playoffs, and yeah, it was bad. They got swept. And it was kind of, I mean, like, obviously, like, I think people were kind of split on the series, but I think a lot of people lean towards Phoenix winning the series because of the talent and because of the fact that, like, in the regular season, they swept Minnesota. Like, they won every time by, basically like double-digit margins. And then the complete opposite happened. Obviously, we know what happened. Defensively, they were awful. But the part that was, I think, pretty unexpected was the offense, right? Where the offense was atrocious in the playoffs as well. Looked pretty out of sorts, looked disorganized, looked like the fourth quarter Suns, but except for the whole game because they were actually one of the worst teams ever in the fourth quarter, which was, again, I think kind of unexpected given the offensive talent on the team. Obviously, the concerns were there about not having a point guard, not having a facilitator, but, it being that bad was unexpected. To be fair, they didn't have that many games where all three of them played together, but it was still, I think, kind of a mess. And it was so bad, right, that they ended up firing Frank Vogel, right, Frankie. They ended up firing him and replacing him with Mike Budenholzer. In terms of what they did this offseason, right? Obviously, that's the first change is you got a new coach. So that could, I mean, probably a better fit for this team just because of the fact that I think offensively, right, he makes more sense for them. He'll get them to get up more threes. Whereas like Vogel, not a bad coach, I don't think at all. I liked him as a coach for the Lakers, but again, didn't fit that team because you're talking about a defensive minded coach for an offensive oriented team. I think it might just make more sense to just kind of have an offensive guy than maybe like the assistants are defensive guys. But, I mean, I don't think he was like the only problem for the roster last year. Like they weren't as good as advertised, I don't think. Beal, right? He was a funny guy last year, in the playoffs more so, right? Because he wasn't healthy in the regular season, but in most of the regular season games he played, he looked good, especially down the stretch when they were really trying to win games to avoid the play-in. And then in the playoffs, he stunk. But to be honest, most of the guys for the Suns were pretty bad, right? Booker was, Durant was okay. He was probably the best of the three, but Booker was bad, and Beal was even worse. So, your three best players all not really having their best performances, and we already know defensively they couldn't do much. Grayson Allen had a really good year, so that was a bright spot because, we forgot to mention they acquired Grayson Allen in that, and Yusuf Nurkic in that DeAndre Ayton deal, right? And then, Chris Paul, right, he was moved over as well. So, and that was in the Beal deal. But, in terms of this offseason, right, they re-signed Royce O'Neal. They re-signed Josh Okogie, and then they made, I think, the surprise acquisition, the biggest one, right? Acquiring Tyus Jones, right, as for the minimum, right, as their point guard, and he's going to start. And again, that's a pretty good pickup for them because that was a guy that we said like last year that should be a target for them. I think more so as a backup point guard than as a starting point guard. But I mean, beggars can't be choosers when you already have three $50 million guys. So I think he can help them out a lot in terms of facilitating. He can also shoot. He shot very well from three as a Wizard last year, basically like a career year. So I think that should help, a decent amount because now you have a guy who can actually run your offense, and especially in those moments where you need a little bit more structure, right? And you don't want to. And then they also added Mason Plumlee as a backup. And again, he's 34, so he's kind of getting up there in age, but he's probably better than Drew Eubanks, right? The guy who was so crucial to Phoenix's offseason that they were okay with losing a pick in the tampering to get him. So that was nice. They did also make a trade in the draft, so they were able to acquire a couple of guys in the draft. They added Ryan Dunn, right, from UVA, and then Oso Ighodaro. And those are pretty solid pickups because those are guys that are not 19-year-old rookies,
Yeah.
but they're at 22-year-old guys. So
Yeah.
those could be like, good rotational pieces for them. I mean, Dunn couldn't shoot in college, but so far in preseason, he's actually hit his threes, at a solid clip. And then Ighodaro, like, that's a good athletic, big that you could just randomly put out there, so that way you don't have to put out Bol. But in terms of their offseason, I like it. I mean, in terms of like, I think I give them an A from the perspective of I think they did better than I would have expected because they got draft picks when I didn't expect them to get any. Although they had one, but they got two. And then also the Tyus Jones thing kind of came out of nowhere. Again, I think he's better as a backup. But in terms of like for this team, that's fine. We'll see how it looks defensively when all five guys are starting out there. But I like what they did. And then obviously they re-signed Royce O'Neal. Then they gave Grayson Allen an extension. They're really small, so I don't really like that. But just in terms of like their identity, I think they should be better offensively. But I don't expect them to be that much better defensively, like probably about the same, because I don't see them being a top 10 defense. And I think for the regular season, they should be pretty good. Obviously, we'll see what they can actually do in terms of being able to win the title. But I think that they definitely improved. And, again, I don't expect them to really win the title at all, personally. Like, I just kind of think it's like a semi-fraudulent contender. But I think that for the most part, they've established a much better identity for offense, and that's a good thing. Like, you can't really hate on that. So I think at the very least, they're closer. But like I said, I don't really know if I can really pick them to come out of the West or win the title. I just don't think they're on that level, mainly on the defensive end. But they did good, I think. At the very least, like they didn't take a step backwards. I think they moved forwards.
Yeah, I give them a B plus for this offseason. I liked all the additions considering the losses. You lost freaking Eric Gordon and Drew Eubanks of all people.
Bye.
Yeah, you brought in Tyus Jones, Monte Morris, Plumlee.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Ryan Dunn. So they addressed the guard room. Now we have a guard room because last year they didn't have a guard room, and that definitely came back to bite them, even though Booker did play pretty well at point guard for the majority of the season. Ryan Dunn, how about that guy? I think defensively, he's been very, very good. And obviously, offensively, he's shown that he is like that. Apparently, I didn't think he was, coming out of UVA, I think it was. I was like, this kid has no offense, bro. But he has proven us wrong thus far through, I think, 3 or 4 preseason games. So take that with a grain of salt. But he looks like a solid rotational guy. But, I mean, that I follow the Suns pretty attentively because KD is my guy. So like this team, I mean, I am higher on them than last year. I will say that. But I think kind of something that people aren't talking about, and I saw Beal getting a lot of flack for this actually. They weren't healthy and they didn't play a lot together last year.
Right.
And people are not talking about that. Like, yes, the first round exit, freaking sweep was really,
Yeah.
really bad. Like that was flagrantly disgusting. But you do kind of have to look at the context. As for I guess why they didn't go super duper far. Obviously, they did meet a superhuman Anthony Edwards, but outside of that, you also didn't get a lot of reps with all three of these guys on the floor. But the cool thing was in the regular season, they were pretty good when all three of them were there. And that's
Right.
where I definitely agree with that logic of, yes, like they will be one of the top teams in the regular season for sure. And that kind of goes back to something that we talk about where a lot of these teams that make big time moves don't really reap the benefits until 2 years down the line. So this will be year
Right.
2 of, this big three, if you want to call it that. And I think, we're probably going to see a better, more concrete version of this team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even like I said, I follow them attentively. And from what I've seen through media day, even through the social media, the training camps and stuff, the vibes are very different than
Yeah.
they were last year. I think last year there was a lot of, nail biting, kind of like we might be cooked with this CBA thing. But I think Budenholzer has honestly brought a different energy to that room. And I know a lot of Suns fans would definitely agree with that.
Yeah. And that's the thing is that I think from that perspective, that's where I think like they're going to be better, I think, in the regular season.
Yeah.
Now, I think the question is this team is not supposed to just be a regular season team. This is supposed to be a championship team.
Yeah.
So I think the question is, do we see like a realistic scenario of them being able to win the title? Because that's where personally I have a little bit more doubts about that, just because of the fact that like say like a team like Boston, if they were able to get to the finals, I think that'd be a really difficult matchup just because of the fact that like yeah, Boston's not like a quote unquote big team, but Phoenix is really small. See, like a Nurkic being able to really kind of like hold up against Boston just because of the fact that like everybody's able to kind of like run up and down the floor. They got a lot of guys that can take you off the dribble. They can space you out, and I think that's kind of an issue. They're going to probably be forced to kind of play some smaller lineups, right? Where it's like maybe Durant's at center, or maybe somebody else, like who knows, experiment with like a Ryan Dunn at center or something like that. But that's the tough part where I don't know if they're going to be able to win the title. And again, that's kind of what this team is supposed to be able to do. But what do you think about that?
I'll say this. Say they do somehow get to the finals. I don't know how that's going to happen considering the amount of talent that is in the Western Conference, especially at those bigger positions like you talked about. But say they do. I don't think they beat New York. I don't think they beat the Celtics. And quite frankly, I don't even think they beat Philly if Philly makes it. Like I think that they have a higher chance of getting to the finals than last year. But I think the chance of winning the finals is just about the same. And that's just
and I
because
think that's
defensively, I don't think they have the personnel to slow down any contender, if I'm keeping it real. And like in the playoffs,
right. And that's the tough part because I know people talk about the offense. I just think to win a title, you have to be able to do more than just score and then like we're okay with being all right defensively. Because I could see it like maybe if they had a little bit more size, but that's just the part where it's just kind of hard for me to get over that aspect. So I guess the question is like, if you're the Suns, what's a successful season? Because I mean, obviously last year was not a successful season, but you know, but I would argue like, okay, we got out of the first round, but then we lost in the second round. I would argue is not a successful season either. I would say at least conference finals for them. I mean, but is that realistic? Like, what is a good year for them outside of like, say they don't win the title? What would they still look at as like this was still a successful ish type season?
finals appearance, because
Okay.
2024, 2025, just for people who don't know, this roster is going to cost over $400 million just for one season. So that's a lot of freaking money for a team that literally just got embarrassed in the first round. So
Right.
I think they need one of the greatest revenge stories of all time. Maybe not winning the finals, but they need to make an appearance.
Mhm.
Book needs to show up. KD needs to show up, Beal needs to show up, and collectively the team needs to be better. And I think they are better, but
Right.
like you said, is that realistic? Probably not. I think realistically we could probably look at them and say
Mhm.
second or third round.
Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe. I mean, but I guess the thing is that at least Durant and Booker, they did play in the Olympics together, so they're fresh off a gold medal, so that's nice. How much can you realistically expect? Is there going to be any level of like managing guys' minutes over the course of the regular season? Possibly, like because I mean, say like even like a Durant, he's in his 18th year, so maybe he might need a little bit of a breather at certain points. He was very healthy last year, so that's good. Can you get back-to-back seasons out of that? Maybe. But the good news is, at the very least, you have Tyus Jones as, I guess, a facilitator, organizer, so that way, I guess if one of the three is out, maybe that helps. But I feel like the one that you could probably do without, at least regular season wise, is probably Beal. Like, I think you need at least Booker or Durant. Like, if one of the three is out, like I feel like it'd be kind of but again, Jones can help with that. But then I guess the question is, like, even a guy like that, like say in the playoffs, it seems like his numbers drop off somewhat. Because he is kind of small, even though he's not like super skinny. And he's clearly a high IQ player, but he was capable of getting Memphis some wins in the playoffs. When Ja was out, and then obviously in the regular season he was able to get them a ton of wins when Ja was out. But I guess how do you see that Tyus Jones factor kind of fitting in and being able to slide in and kind of fix some of the issues with this team?
Well, I mean, last year they ran a lot of Grayson Allen or Eric freaking
Mhm.
Gordon at point guard.
Right.
When some of these guys were hurt, or obviously if there was like a rotational lapse or something like that. So having Monte Morris and Tyus Jones, I think will go a long way in the regular season, like you said. I just don't
Yeah.
know what a Monte Morris looks like in the playoffs, and I
Oh,
kind of
last
know,
year.
yeah, and I kind of know what Tyus Jones looks like in the playoffs, and it's not too pretty.
Mhm.
So I just don't know
Mhm.
how to feel about it in terms of the playoffs, but I do like it for the regular season. That's kind of where I'll leave it at.
Right. And the Suns over under is 47.5
Over.
over 2.
Yeah, I think they go
Now,
over.
so do you think that they're going to be a top 4 in the West then?
Yeah,
Okay.
I
And
think they
then I
have.
guess
I think they have what it takes to, if healthy. I think they have what it takes to be top four.
yeah, yeah. I think so too. I think if as long as they're healthy, they should be able, I think, to get to 50
Mm-hmm.
wins or more, because I think offensively they have enough to be able to win that many games.
Yeah,
Just too much talent, I think, just to kind of just be borderline playing or playing again.
sure.
So like I said, I like what they did the offseason. I'm just still not sold on them being able to win the title. But I do give them props for them being, improve the team in the certain margins. That would have been tough to do it given the circumstance. Because like you said, team's very expensive, and now being a super expensive team hurts you even more than it used to. So I give them major props for that.
Yeah,
So we'll see.
yeah.
And then last but not least, Los Angeles Lakers.
Hmm.
Right? We finally reached the last team of our offseason review. And what a team to end it with, right? So the Lakers a couple years ago went to the conference finals after starting the season off pretty terribly. Then they had what most people thought, ourselves included, had a really good offseason, right? Where they added guys like Gabe Vincent and Torian Prince. Um, and then obviously the season didn't really work out that well for them. Um, Obviously, there were some guys that were hurt. Gabe Vincent played in what 10, 11 games, and in the games he played was basically a shell of himself because he wasn't healthy. Vanderbilt barely played, right? He got hurt in the preseason and then played in 20, 30 games and then got hurt in February and then still isn't back, right? Like, I mean, I think before we got on, I think JJ Redick said he's going to be out at least 2 more weeks. So, them saying he's going to be ready sometime during the beginning of the season. I mean, that isn't exactly accurate, but again, these things are constantly changing. So, but they have a history of kind of, I think, I don't know, not really being that upfront about certain injuries, but it's whatever at this point. But either way, then the latter part of the season, we know what happened, right? They stopped starting Torian Prince. And after they had benched both D'Lo and Austin at different points for different reasons, then they went with that starting five of D'Lo, Austin, Rui, LeBron, and AD. They ended up closing the season on a pretty good note, and then they got into the play-in, and then they lost in the first round to the Nuggets. Although the series, again, like the year before, was competitive, but they weren't able to pull it off. So it felt like, it felt like an unsuccessful year, right? Like just not a good year given what the year before looked like and then given what we thought they did in the offseason. So then what did they do? Then initially we thought that they were going to hire Dan Hurley from UConn, and then we got bamboozled. So that didn't. No, actually, initially we thought they were going to hire JJ Redick. Then the Dan Hurley thing came out of nowhere. Then we got bamboozled. Then they hired JJ Redick. So that's the first thing that they did in the offseason. And then the second thing that they did was in the draft, they drafted Dalton Knecht, right? Who again, pretty good scorer in college. And so far, in the games he's played in the summer league in the preseason, seems like a, nice athlete. Good shooter, especially off the catch, even off of like handoffs and curls. So I think that's going to be a nice addition to the team, assuming that, he gets like decent rotational minutes. Who knows? I mean, with Vanderbilt out, he'll probably be forced to play, where he may not have played as much if he were healthy, just because of, the structure of the roster. Then they also drafted Bronny James in the second round, 55th pick of the draft. We know he's probably not going to play most of the season, if not all of it, right? Mostly a G League guy. I know there were, they're talking about he's going to play, like, probably they're going to play together with LeBron, like, on opening night, possibly, which, I mean, I don't really have an issue with that. I mean, like, as long as it's not, like, a scenario where it's like, oh, it's the fourth quarter, we're down by 20, so let's put him in with LeBron. Like, no, don't do that. And I think, like, just get it done, get it out of the way, let them have the moment because it's a special moment. So then that way you don't have to, like, stress about it over the course of the season. Because we know a lot of people have been talking about the Bronny stuff, which, again, like, he's not quite ready to be, like, a real rotational player. And that's why he's going to be in the G League, right, for the whole season, presumably, which not a problem because, again, 55th pick of the draft. But if you noticed, I only mentioned, like, basically two guys, right, JJ Redick and Dalton Knecht, and that's because they did nothing else. I mean, I guess Cam Reddish, Christian Wood, and Jackson Hayes opted into their player options. They did re-sign LeBron. He was initially going to take less money if they could get somebody, but they didn't get anybody. And then they also did re-sign Max Christie to a 4-year deal. Nothing wrong with that. 4 years, basically $32 million. Didn't really play much of last year aside from random moments, and I think that was kind of a level of contention last year. Also forgot to mention they hired JJ Redick. Guess who they had to get rid of in order to hire him? Darvin Ham, who we had talked about at points. First year, fine. Ended on a pretty good note, I think. Then last year, don't know what happened. Yeah, and then clearly like the vibes seem better, and it seems like there's a lot of like just a lot of like shade thrown in the direction of Mr. Ham, given how last year's season went. But yeah, they didn't really do anything like in terms of the actual roster, which I had already kind of hinted at. So, and it's kind of funny because last year's offseason, in retrospect, makes it seem kind of worse, right? Mainly because you gave those three guys, Wood, Hayes, and Reddish, player options, and none of them played well enough over the course of the season to opt out and then presumably get a better deal elsewhere, right? They opted into minimum contracts, which basically suggests that, like, if they had opted out, they may not have been signed by anybody. And again, like, they had their moment. Each guy had, like, their moments at different points in the season, like Christian Wood earlier in the season, right? There were moments where he would close with LeBron and AD. They would ask him to guard Kevin Durant. Somehow it would work. Don't really know how. But They would have him close because he could also rebound and space the floor a little bit, even though he didn't really shoot well from three last year. Hayes, right, during the in-season tournament and after, right, he kind of became a regular part of the rotation again as a lob threat, athletic big, and then Reddish was a part of their early rotation, as like the defensive starting guard next to D'Angelo Russell at different points. Because I forgot to mention different guys started and came off the bench. So I don't know what to expect. I mean, again, they didn't really do much for a team that wasn't able to, do a whole lot. I mean, I don't think they're going to be terrible. I think the main thing is that are they going to be better than last year? And that's kind of the part where I'm not really sure because most of the other teams ahead of them got better, right? Like maybe you could argue a couple of teams didn't, but they were still already better. And the Lakers didn't realistically improve. Like essentially, it's a coaching change, basically, and that's kind of it. Aside from, I guess, the Dalton Connect pick, and Redick has never coached at any level, so we don't really know what to expect over the course of of the regular season. We know he wants them to shoot more threes. Um, so I guess some guys will shoot more threes. We'll see what that looks like. Offensively, to be honest, I don't really have that many worries. It's more so the other end of the floor that I think we have a problem with, especially with the fact that Jared Vanderbilt, we don't know when he's coming back. And that's kind of one of their more important guys defensively. And you just don't really have anyone else on the roster that's really able to kind of do what he does on the defensive end, right? Like Rui can defend bigger guys, but he's not a guy you would really want guarding the guys that Vanderbilt guards. He doesn't rebound the same way. He doesn't really, he does. They're different players, right? Rui's more geared towards offense. Vanderbilt's geared more towards defense, and the guys that Vanderbilt guards are not the guys that Rui guards, right? Just very different players. And then after that, I mean, like LeBron at this stage, at the age of 40, you can't expect him to play consistent high level defense. It's just not going to happen. And then the backcourt we know defensively is not amazing. And then offensively, they don't really make up for it, at the highest level to be able to make up for the defense, right? Like D'Angelo Russell in the regular season is fine, but we know in the playoffs he's a lot more spotty because his floor is really low. Like his worst games are, not very good. But either way, Gabe Vincent, resurgent year. Okay, that's cool. But I just don't really know what can you realistically expect them, I don't know what you can realistically expect in terms of how can they be better than last season. You could make the case that because the starting five last year they didn't use until late in the season, that could just give you a higher floor. Like if you start the season with that roster, then maybe you can win more games early on. But like I said, I just defensively I have some major questions, and you're gonna have to play Reddish because and Max Christie, can he be a playable guy? I mean probably, but again, he's only one guy. And they still never addressed the backup big man situation, so they didn't really address a lot of the issues that they have. Still a lot of guards. You got to kind of consolidate the roster. Also, it doesn't help that the guy that they go, actually, I honestly both of them, right, just haven't really panned out so far. Jalen Hood-Schifino and Maxwell Lewis. Neither guy I don't really expect to really play, just because I don't really think they're very good. Maybe JHS plays, but I doubt it. Like, he's a guard that needs the ball in his hands, and it doesn't seem like he's, really a good outside shooter. I mean, inside the 3-point line, he's okay, but still, I don't really see much from either of those guys. So, I mean, starting five, I assume, is the same as last season, but, without addressing the backup big man situation, and now you have a gaping hole, at the forward spot with Vanderbilt being out. I don't know. Like, I don't really see them probably. I definitely don't think they're a contender. But then you also have to hope and pray that LeBron and AD are healthy again, right? Especially AD. If AD has to miss more than like 15, 20 games, then they're probably not going to even make the playoffs. Borderline, maybe not even get to the play in. And that's just kind of rough that they didn't really seem like they had a contingency plan. I mean, yay, they grabbed Christian Coloco as on a two-way deal, but he's still not cleared to play. So I didn't really like almost anything they did in the offseason other than like, okay, Redick, we'll see. But for this season, I mean, as a rookie coach, I don't know. And then Connect, that's a good pick, but nothing else because they didn't do anything else. So, I mean, I'd say D minus. for me, just because and the only thing that's preventing me from giving them an F is the Dalton Connect pick. That's it. Like if they didn't draft him, it would have been a straight up F. Like maybe even F minus, if I'm gonna be honest.
Wow.
But at least you didn't lose LeBron. So that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Like that's the other thing. Like, yeah, I mean, like, we'll see. But I don't really expect much from this team in terms of, like I said, I don't think they're a contender. But if LeBron and AD are healthy, like I could see them like winning enough games to be in the play-in, but probably not much higher than that because I just don't think there's enough after those guys, mainly on the defensive end, where it's just again you're asking AD to do a lot defensively, and they don't really have anybody else that can really help him, especially because again, Jackson Hayes is your only backup center for now. So good luck with that.
Yeah, it is rough. But I think the Lakers are in one of the most intriguing spots that we've ever been able to cover on the channel because, like you said, they didn't do much in the offseason, but they look so different through the preseason. First, let me say my grade. I think the grade is probably around a C, and I know that's a lot higher than you. I like the Connect pick a lot. I think it fits the mold of what they're trying to do. It definitely fits, I guess, we don't know what a JJ Redick type of player would look like, in terms of what he gravitates towards as a coach, but this seems like the right kind of guy to add, for a first-year coach or
Rob
whatever.
Pelinka said they were drawing up plays for him.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, we know that there is some sort of connection there, and I like that a lot because a lot of people had him a lot higher than where he was picked. So him sliding exactly. Him sliding to the Lakers is almost like, poetry. The Bronny thing is a thing. And I think we just kind of have to live with it. Like you can question it all you want. You can question the contract. You can question the minutes. We all know the answer at the end of the day. Through what he's shown, throughout his summer league and preseason, he's just clearly not ready to be a consistent player on the roster. It's clear and evident. Right. Not saying he'll never get there, but don't expect him to be, some crazy elite steal for the Lakers this year. But I think the biggest thing that you have to look at is the coaching. Through the preseason, they have done some things that I really, really like. They have, and I know it might turn into more of a preseason talk than an offseason talk because there's not a lot to freaking talk about.
No.
But I really like what they've done with Anthony Davis offensively, LeBron offensively, and even the guards. Like I said, Connect, AR, D'Lo, turning them more into off-ball guys, which they were not. Which they were not freaking doing with Darvin Ham. So, I like the fact that they're using the guards kind of not necessarily as like the primary options, but using the primary options as decoys. So like, AD setting a screen, slipping wide open, somebody drops, and then that means the corner's wide open in the right, for example. Not to get like too Xy and OE, but things like that. I think the creativity is very different from last year, and I think that's something that they're going to lean on heavily, which is why, like you said, you don't have any real gripes and concerns offensively. It's just personnel-wise, what are we going to do defensively to stop other teams' best players? Probably not a whole lot. I don't want to be relying on LeBron James defensively at his age, to the level that they did last year. And same thing with AD, if I'm being real. They're kind of in the same predicament as the Miami Heat were last year where, we all know Bam can play the 5, but you'd preferably like to have him at the 4 because of his switchability and versatility, and then put him next to a 5 that also complements his game offensively and defensively. You don't freaking have that with Anthony Davis. So now he's stuck in this weird middle ground defensively where you don't really know what to do with him. But it's just tough because Jackson Hayes is your next best guy, and he's not a rim protector. He doesn't really help Anthony Davis a whole lot, in my opinion. So
not a physical at all. So.
And that's the nail in the coffin for me. Like, you didn't address that at all. But granted, I know their hands were kind of tied, I guess you could say, but it really
Mhm.
stunk that a lot of the big men kind of got sniped, from kind of like underneath their feet, and it makes you kind of wonder like why they chose these other places over the Lakers. I guess they didn't have a lot of financial flexibility, but
No roster spots, and
exactly.
that's the part that I mentioned because those guys opted into their player options, they had 15 guys before free agency even started. So, and none of those guys they were able to trade. Maybe they can, maybe they package them all together. I mean, I don't think they will, but I mean, but they already had started off free agency with really no flexibility to move anybody because again, they signed 3 guys and like Christian Wood, I can understand the player option because like prior to last season, like I think he was still looked at as like a solid player
Hmm.
that like where multiple teams were interested in signing him. But I just don't really quite understand the other 2 guys where like how much competition were you in to sign like a Cam Reddish or like a Jackson Hayes, and that's
Mm-hmm.
the part where it's like if they were just 1 year deals, then you'd have the open roster spots then if you wanted to, like you might have been able to sign one of those guys, like say like a Clay Thompson or a Valanciunas or whomever, even if it was like some other random minimum contract guy. But
Right.
by not having those roster spots, you couldn't do any of that. And that's again, some of these small mistakes, like though once you start making them over and over again, they start to add up. And that's, partly where they are now, right? And then you had the big mistake, the Russell Westbrook deal.
Mm.
And that's kind of the part where like they're still kind of recovering from it because they lost, key pieces in that trade where you had like solid players on both ends of the floor and they've tried to replace some of that, right? And like they got some guys back, like, you got D'Lo, you got like Austin, but you don't have enough defense, I think. And like the backup guards, Vincent and Christie are good defenders, but again, your 2 main guards, those are the guys that are going to get the bulk of the guard minutes, and so and them together, combine that with Rui and LeBron and AD, like I said, offensively should still be good. And like you mentioned, Redick seems like he's prioritizing a lot of motion and movement with his offense, and certainly a lot of 3-point shooting. So and again, like they didn't take a lot of threes last year. They the latter part of the season they shot at a good clip, but they didn't take a lot of them. And that's where like, offensively, can they do some things to modernize the offense a little bit? I mean, obviously, like their 2 best players are not like I mean, LeBron shot very well from 3 last year. But like obviously that's not the thing he does best. And then like with AD, he doesn't really shoot threes at all. And just hasn't shot threes well in a while. I mean, the last time he was like an okay 3-point shooter was the title year. That was 5 years ago. So, I mean, so when you have that, obviously you can have them play through the post because they're pretty good at that. But again, like you said, the fact that they didn't really address the center spot, that's the part where it's like it's hard for me to kind of really take them seriously as a contender. I mean, it's not just that, but like that's a big part of it where it's just like, you know, who are you going to have other than AD that you could say, well, let's put him on Jokic, let's put him on Embiid, let's put him on, name any other center that's like even like a middle of the pack guy that's like just a physical option. Like AD can guard a lot of those guys, but like he shouldn't be your only option. Like, I mean, you have to have a little bit of flexibility and versatility, and they don't have that. And again, it also doesn't help that a guy like Vanderbilt, you don't have a contingency plan for him because when he doesn't play, like you're smaller, and then with all of these guards on the roster, you're gonna be smaller anyways. And then like some of these guards aren't the most athletic guys, so that's kind of the tough part there. Where we've talked about it multiple times, right? Where like athleticism can kind of translate to defense. Not that just because you're athletic, you're automatically a good defender, but there's kind of a baseline level of athleticism I think you need to, before you kind of start falling off, like as a defensive team, ceiling wise. In the NBA, of course, mainly. So I don't know. I mean, again, like I could see them being a play-in team, right? Like I don't think they're going to be as bad as like the Clippers necessarily, but again, you still have to hope and pray that LeBron and AD are healthy because they were still in the play-in with both of those guys playing 70 plus games. I think that's the most games they played together in a season aside from the title year.
Yeah.
Which wasn't even an 82 game season, right? Other than that, like both of those guys have kind of played somewhere between like, 50 to 60 something games, right? I think AD had a couple of seasons where he was at like 40. So, that's that's the part where it's like that's the scary part. If both of those guys are healthy, I think they make the play in. If AD has to miss a lot of time, yeah, that's going to be bad. Also, they don't even have their own pick. It goes to Atlanta. It was New Orleans, and then they traded it to Atlanta in the DeJounte Murray deal. So they have no incentive to be bad, anyways. So not that you would want to be bad with LeBron and AD on the roster, but there's no incentive because you don't even have your own pick. So unless there's a deal that I don't unless there's a deal that I don't see an obvious move out there that makes them, like a contender, at least as of right now. And with that deal not being done, I don't see it with this group.
Yeah, for me, the main takeaway for this offseason is there was a change that needed to be made in the locker room at the coaching position.
Yeah.
You did that. I guess you didn't maybe get like the best candidate, maybe, but you definitely got a change. And I think through the preseason, and that's what I'm talking about, where they're in a unique position because we've been able to kind of analyze and break them down through the preseason versus some other teams where, earlier on, like when we were talking about the Eastern Conference, we didn't get to, take that preseason knowledge and kind of put that into the offseason grade. So that's where I kind of like what I've seen from JJ Redick, and that's what's really carrying the bulk of the grade for me.
Yeah.
Did you
exactly.
freeze? I think you froze
Yes, I
or
did.
something.
You were frozen. I didn't
Okay,
know what
I got
happened.
you.
Okay. But yeah, so their over under is 43.5. What do we think about this one? Because this one I feel like is a tricky one.
I think they go over.
I think over too. I think if LeBron and AD play like 60 something games, that number is just like almost too low. I feel like where it's like as long as they're healthy, I think they can get it. They're not healthy, yeah, it's a wrap. But if they're healthy, I think they go over. But like realistically, like how much higher can they go? Like I don't think they can get to 50. Because last year they were at 46. So I mean, or 47. So I mean, could they get to 48? Like could they win more games than last season?
Yeah,
But like how many more?
probably like 4.
Okay, so I guess like if everything goes right for them, they might be able to crack like 50 is what you're saying basically, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's
And that's
easily attainable.
yeah, like and so you would need LeBron and AD healthy. You would need Vanderbilt to come back hopefully like within a month or two, like I think. Then you would need, I think, Connect in the meantime to be good. You need Max Christie to be good. Then you would need D'Lo to be able to replicate what he did last year because he did have a really good regular season last year to his credit. I know it sounds like I pick on him a lot, but he was very good for them in the regular season last year. I think you need Austin Reeves to probably continue to be somewhat better. How much better he can be, I don't know. But and then after that, I think you need one more defensive guy that could help pop off. And it's like I don't see any of the other young guys on the roster being able to do that. I mean, JHS, what do you think of him? Are you kind of in the same boat as me, or do you see something that I don't see?
Well, as a Wizards fan, he's the Johnny Davis of your team, so take that as you will.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see like the potential is there, but will we ever get to see that? Probably.
And it's also just not the ideal team anyways.
No.
Because a guard that needs the ball, like, but doesn't shoot well, like, is just not a good fit next to LeBron and AD. And, like, him needing the ball anyways is a little bit tricky just because of the fact that, like, LeBron, likes to play with, and to be fair, like, I'm sure he wants to do more off-ball stuff anyways, but if you're going to be a guard next to LeBron and AD that needs the ball in their hands, they got to be able to shoot. But it seems like for whatever reason, they've grabbed a bunch of guys like that where it's like a combo guard, or a guy that, can have the ball in their hands, but isn't the best outside shooter. Like Russell Westbrook, Dennis Schroeder. I mean, those are just two guys. And then obviously JHS, at least, D'Lo can shoot and, Reeves can shoot as well. But I don't know. If you look at the list of guards that they've acquired, then I also mentioned like THT. That was a guy they drafted. That's another guard type player that needed the ball that isn't the best shooter. Like, they have like a love affair with those type of players. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, they love a lot of these like undersized-ish kind of combo guards who don't really shoot the ball that well. Um, or even like guys that aren't that small. Like I don't know why. I mean, at one point, what was it last year? They had like four guards that would play together a lot, right?
Yeah.
And like half of them couldn't shoot.
Yeah,
Like
you're
remember,
right.
or 2 seasons ago, right? 'Cause that was like when we saw Westbrook and Schroeder and Beverly and all these and Walker and all these other guys together. Just I don't know, but like you said, I think they're in a spot that is unlike a lot of other teams. Like you have the combination of LeBron being 40, right? AD also being, like still in his prime, but not quite as good as he was, mainly on the athleticism aspect 5 years ago, but he's still awesome, of course. Um and then, after that, like and because of that, the type of players that they need around them is different. Like you could get away with LeBron and AD and then a bunch of 3-and-D guys because they could handle most of the offensive workload. Now they need a little bit more assistance, but once you start doing that, then that comes at the cost of some of the defense. And then it just doesn't help that some of the decisions they made also just have not helped. Like, but to be fair, there have been some good players that they've just kind of let walk out the door. Like Caruso, let him go. Some of these other guys, like you couldn't help it. Like Malik Monk, you just couldn't afford to pay him, so no real issues there. And then obviously KCP, they traded for Russell Westbrook, right? Yeah, didn't
Mhm.
really love that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that's the tough part where it's like it's not the easiest job in the world anyways. So I'm not trying to sit here and say like everything they do is horrible, but at the same time, you like you know I don't know. I feel like there's a world where like it could have been handled a little bit better, but
Sure.
um either way, yeah, I'm kind of with you where I feel like some people think they're going to just be horrible
No.
and I don't think they'll be horrible. I just don't think they'll be a contender. But I think like they could be like, a frisky play-in team and then if
This
everything
is a
goes
good
right, maybe
regular
like
season team.
yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, and that's kind of I think how you have to frame it. But I think ideally, if you have LeBron and AD, like you shouldn't just be a good regular season team. But that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Yeah, you're right.
So now, news and rumors. Not like a ton of news to get into in terms of or rumors to get into. Obviously, just a couple of shout outs. Lonzo Ball, he returned right, and he hadn't played in a couple of years, and he looked good. So nice to see him back out on the court and playing right, which that was awesome to see. The standing ovation and like the cheers that the arena gave him because the Bulls sell out, their games even though they haven't been good in a while. Their fans are always there, and they're always like willing to cheer on their team
Yeah.
when they see good basketball. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah, shout out to that. I know that was like a huge thing where like every update seemed like it was just trending in the wrong direction, but we finally got to see him back on the court. And he definitely shut Stephen A up with that one. So, W.
Yeah. And then we don't have to talk about the Kawhi thing because we already mentioned that.
Mhm.
But there were some other injuries as well. Some that had happened before we last met, but then some that had also happened or that were revealed today. Paul George in one of those preseason games, hyperextended knee, so he's gonna be out. I think he's gonna be reevaluated in a week, but it sounded like, according to Shams, that he will probably be out during the start of the regular season. So I I mean, and then obviously they already had mentioned Embiid basically said, I'm never playing in back to backs again. We know they're going to load manage him anyways. So, that's kind of rough that like you're probably going to start the season without Paul George, who was your biggest acquisition. And then you already know Embiid is probably, he's going to probably play like every other game.
Right.
Which again, at this point is probably what you're going to have to do. But, it's tough. I mean, you have Tyrese Maxey, so that's cool. And you have a bunch of other guys, so that's good. But, Paul George getting hurt in a preseason game is not what you want to see. But they did say no structural damage, so that's good. It's just a reminder of the fact of there's a gamble in terms of because of his age and his injury history, something that could happen again. It's this may hopefully it's just a one off, but it may not be.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying in my real disbelief of the Philly team, where this was inevitable. Like you said, same thing with the Kawhi thing. Like, we know that these guys are going to miss time. It's just a matter of when. And the fact that it's starting before the season really officially starts, a week before tip off, is not a good sign.
Mhm.
But prayers for the injury,
I
though,
mean,
for sure.
yeah. And I mean, I guess maybe you'd rather get it out of the way now than have it happen like later. But
It's
I
gonna
mean, you'd
happen
also like,
again though.
yeah, I was gonna say you'd also like to not have it happen at all. But
Right. Right.
kind of how it goes.
Mhm.
Hartenstein for the Oklahoma City Thunder fractured his left hand in one of those preseason games, and he will be reevaluated in 5 to 6 weeks. So you're essentially probably talking about month and a half, but that's just the reevaluation date. So he could be out for like 2 months. So we may not see him until at the earliest, like mid late December, possibly later than that. So that's definitely rough for Oklahoma City because that's one of their big acquisitions. Um, Obviously, because they retained most of their roster last year, they're just going to rely on the guys that they had last year. But it sucks that with Oklahoma City, the interesting thing with them was like they had a pretty good run of good health. But obviously, what could derail their regular season standings run, which I think most of us expect them to be the top seed, is that if this year is kind of just like a injury riddled season. Not saying it's going to happen, but again, that sucks that one of your biggest if not your biggest acquisition of the offseason is already going to miss probably the first 2 months of the season.
Yeah, it really does suck for them. I think it's going to maybe force them to even be better. I don't know.
Mhm.
But we'll see about it because I think we did have high expectations, for this team, and a lot of people
Yeah.
do as well. And I think a part of
Yeah.
that was because of Hartenstein. So, you know, I
I mean,
it sucks.
yeah. I mean, at least, it's not like one of your three best players. So
Sure.
that's not quite as bad as say like losing Kawhi or losing Paul George. But it's still not ideal just because of the fact that like, again, he's adds to the potential extra physicality, extra rebounding, and now you're kind of back to being outside of Chet Small. And I think Jalen Williams the big is also still hurt as well. So I mean they're essentially without like a backup center during the early part of the season,
Yeah.
which again not ideal, but they still have enough talent that they'll still, as long as the young guys play well, they could still win a lot of these games. But those bigger physical matchups may still be a tougher for them.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I
Right.
hadn't looked at their schedule, recently, but so I'm not quite West. Nobody schedule because it's the West. So
Right.
you're gonna play all those teams, a lot of those teams, like at the least amount 3 times. So
Right.
and then moving on, Jared McCain for Philly, right? The rookie. He had basically like it seems like a bruised lung kind of, right? Where I think he fell. He had to be hospitalized, but it seems like he avoided a serious injury. So they reevaluated him for a concussion. They didn't seem like they found any concussion symptoms. Obviously, he doesn't factor in as big, he doesn't really factor too much into their regular season rotation, but good to hear that he avoided a potentially serious injury because it looked bad
Yeah.
when I saw it.
Yeah. Prayers on that one, man. That one kind of caught me off guard. If I'm keeping it real.
Yeah. Um and then apparently there's some more Laker rumors, I guess, we're gonna have to discuss, I guess, potentially. According to Anthony Irwin, the Lakers are eyeing some big names in the league. In terms of the names the Lakers might be after, league sources point to, I feel like we've talked about almost all of these guys at some point. Kyle Kuzma, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Walker Kessler, Bruce Brown. Also, one name to keep an eye on is Zach LaVine. So, of all those names, who do we like? Who do we say? Who do we say stay away from? And I don't even know because I feel like most of these names we've heard before.
I mean,
In fact, I've heard all these names before from previous reporting from him and also others.
if I'm I wouldn't really want any of these guys on the roster. I would want an ideal, elite two-way player, but it doesn't seem like any of those guys fit that kind of
Right.
mold.
Yeah, I mean, like Kessler's a big, um, but like I don't even know what Utah is trying to do with him. I mean, do they really want to actually trade him? I mean,
Is he
I
even
don't. I
good
wouldn't.
anymore? Like that would be my question.
Um, and then Cam Johnson, 3-point shooter. I mean, Kyle Kuzma's fine. Dorian Finney-Smith, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't get much to get him. Bruce Brown, I mean, may just be kind of like a Jokic merchant at this point. I'm not saying he's bad,
Yeah.
And I mean, like guard wise, he'd probably be like a nice physical option, but his contract is 20 million, and I feel like I wouldn't want to give up like multiple rotational pieces just to get him. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm like D'Lo Bruce Brown swap maybe, but like I don't know, that's a big change. I guess that you just give more offensive responsibility to Reeves, and then Zach LaVine. We've talked about that before. I mean, we talked about that like half of last year. I feel like where it's like
Mhm.
it's just too much money. Too many guys that you have to send out in order to make that work. I mean, again, for him, I guess if he plays well, looks good, and kind of gets back to what he was like, before his injuries. Like, but it would still be like I wouldn't really want to do it unless I was like just completely desperate because I just feel like the amount of guys you have to give up, and it's just Zach LaVine, and you still have other holes that you'd have to find some way to address. And that'd be really hard to do because 40 million of that or whatever it is invested in him. I'm not saying at all he's a bad player. It's just that's a lot to give up for one guy.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I agree in terms of the Zach LaVine thing. So probably, I don't know. And like Kuzma, I don't feel like he fits the mold of that team anymore. I don't know. It's just, I just don't think that they're gonna get any of those guys. If I'm keeping it real, like I just don't.
Right.
Yeah, I think this is all smoke.
Especially if like especially if all of them are asking for like you know, X level of compensation, right? Like it like because some of these guys I don't think are worth any firsts. I think it's more so like swap a player, but like those other teams may want a first.
Right, right,
And if they and again, like we know the Lakers price tag is like if it's more than one first, unless it's for a star, it's not happening. And then if it's one first, maybe, but probably not very likely. Like I think ideally they would probably prefer to kind of like fleece somebody, but realistically, is another team going to let you do that unless they're like really desperate? Like probably not. But
yeah,
maybe there's something that we don't see coming. But yeah, I mean, like I don't know. Like I mean, like if it happened, depending on the deal, I wouldn't say no. Like I wouldn't hate any of them, but there are some that I definitely don't really like as much. But
right.
again, like you said, I'm kind of leaning towards probably not really anything. Unless something changes, right? And like that's the only way something happens because I just don't see the Lakers giving up picks to get any of these guys,
Yeah, you're
and I
right.
don't see the other team like, acquiescing unless they feel like they have to.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, it was a longer one, but we had to get this done obviously before the start of the regular season because the regular season starts on Tuesday, and obviously, we'll be talking about that and going through that as it happens. And again, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. If you leave a comment, we'll read it at the beginning of the video. And obviously, if you like it, then we'll show up in the algorithms more. And then if you subscribe, that helps us grow the channel because the channel again, it had been growing, but we would like for it to grow even more. So, hopefully people can help us out and, we'd really appreciate it. So, we'll see you in the next episode and we're out.